Next we get into the torts of privacy. And there are essentially four major torts when we're looking towards privacy. 1. Private facts. 2. Intrusion upon seclusion. 3. False light. And 4. Appropriation. When it comes to false light, what we're really doing is talking about putting someone in a false light. Essentially, this is kind of what looks like defamation. In this case, it's making a person seem to the public eye in which they are actually not. One of these places where we see a difference is that there doesn't always have to be a false statement shown. And one of these places was in Braun versus Flint. And in this case, Braun worked at an amusement park in Texas where basically she worked with Ralph, the diving pig. As part of her act, Braun would be in a pool with Ralph the pig, and she would have this bottle of milk with a nipple on it, and Ralph would then go and swim in the pool to her. And essentially Larry Flint's magazine had a picture of this in his magazine called Chic, which essentially was female nudity in most of it. Essentially they showed this with a postcard of the magazine called Chic Thrills. And because of that, it was taken out of false light, right? 1, she didn't approve this. 2, the amusement park didn't approve it. And 3, she was kind of shown with that. Also, this also goes back to the fact that she wasn't a public figure. Here, why that's important is because, of course, you can't sue for defamation because, in fact, this photo is taken of her doing her act, so it's not false. But she's being put in a false light. Next, we have intrusion upon seclusion. Intrusion upon seclusion is essentially where you think you have privacy, which again, for the most part, the only place that you actually have privacy is when you are in your own place that you pay for. If you do not pay for it, it is not your place. Okay? So intrusion upon seclusion would be actually intruding upon that sort of space. The elements of this are that there's an expectation of privacy, that there was an intentional invasion of privacy, and that the invasion was highly offensive to a reasonable person. Again, the expectation of privacy is usually key here, because remember, if you don't pay for it, if you're at your friend's house, your friend can put cameras wherever they want. A corporation can put cameras wherever they want on their property, because as property right holder, you have a right to protect your property and surveil your property, right? And so you don't have those sort of expectations of rights. So any place where you go, you don't have those kind of expectation of privacy claims. Next is appropriation. Appropriation is using someone's image for commercial gain. This is why, as filmmakers, I try to tell all of you to get talent release forms before you actually start shooting, because if you don't have them, you can't move forward with your project. And if you're trying to go to a distributor, the distributor is going to want all of those talent release forms to indemnify themselves against lawsuits because you didn't do the paperwork. Okay? When it comes to appropriation, these things happen sort of all the time in sort of weird ways, right? The biggest thing is sometimes that there's usually a contract that comes into place. So for example, my grandmother was on a billboard on I-80, which goes really between, well, I-80 is a long one, but the big stretch between Toledo and Cleveland, which is where my cousin lived. And she was driving down the road one day, and there along the side of the highway was my grandmother advertising for the retirement community that she was in. Of course, we had no idea that she did this, but what happened is that they came around and there was a photographer and they said, hey, do you want some free photographs, right? Do you want some portraits? And as they said yes to that, they also agreed to use those rights because they didn't pay for it, right? My grandma didn't have to pay for these photos that she ended up getting out of these, right? That because of that, she then she gave away her rights and her image for commercial gain, so that they used that for her. Of course, the weird part was, as this sort of campaign went on, the one shot was just of my grandmother, you know, and on a billboard, but the next shot was my grandmother and another family, you know, because they put people together that weren't necessarily the real family. So those things happen. And another one of these cases where we saw this was like Girls Gone Wild, and what they would do is they would hand you a t-shirt, and in exchange of the t-shirt you gave up your rights to sue for that. So we see these sorts of transactions, and when those transactions happen, you receive something in the benefit of this, and so therefore you've given up your rights. But for the most part, you usually see a signed contract of some sort. Another time for me that this happened was I was at a bar with my friend, and essentially there were also shot girls there that night, and they came over and they said, "Hey, do you want to do a shot of?" And I don't remember what it was, and I said, "Sure." And part of that is they're like, "Well, we have to take a picture with you," and of course, who's going to? I mean, it's me, my friend, and these two very nice young ladies. Why am I going to say no? And essentially, they took a picture of us having fun, doing different shots, and all of that. Now, of course, they're using it for marketing material, right? And so they are, of course, I don't know why someone would use my face to market anything, but it's out there, so I figured I was pretty safe. I knew what was happening in the moment. But essentially what they were doing is getting photographs of people who they want to sell towards, and so that they have these images that they can use of people having a good time with their products, right? And they didn't have to really pay for anything because they just, you know, they just brought the cases of alcohol with them. So those things exist, and you have to be careful of them. Of course, like I said, I knew what I was getting into, and when I knew as soon as these sort of random photos popped up in Grandma's apartment, and I asked her where she got them from, I immediately knew what that was. Again, I wasn't expecting to see her on I-80, but I knew that those were what they're doing. So be aware of when someone is taking your image, and especially if they're giving you something, be aware of what they're actually using it for. When it comes to the image, it's important to understand that it is, again, identity. It doesn't have to just be your image. In all the cases that we've talked about so far, it's pretty much a picture of somebody. However, there are plenty of cases out there that are beyond pictures. There are drawings, right? If you go and Google Grand Theft Auto 5, there's the girl going like, right? And I know I look nothing like it. But if you remember that, or if you want to Google it, that's what you're looking for. And essentially Lindsay Lohan sued and said that that was her trademark thing. You know, it was like girl in bikini giving a peace sign, holding a phone. And so therefore you could identify that it was Lindsay Lohan. She lost the case, but that's kind of the thing that you can get. So you can have artist renderings. You can have voices. Bette Midler sued Ford over that, where they used they used her likeness. Another one is sort of situational. Vanna White sued Samsung Electronics in the 80s. Of course, Vanna White is the person who turns the letters on. Well, not really turns them anymore. She kind of like touches the screen. But back in the day, she turned the letters for Wheel of Fortune. And so basically there was an advertisement. You can, again, Google it. It's a pretty easy image to Google. That has Vanna White, or this robot turning letters, right? Selling a VCR, talking about, I think, 2020. And because of that, she sued and she actually won, right? Because it was an evening gown turning letters on a game show with a blonde wig, I think. So those are all things that they were able to identify. So pictures, names, likenesses, voices, all of those things can count towards identity, right? This would be the same thing as kind of, if any of you know Josh Robert Thompson, who was Jeff the Skeleton on the Late Show with Craig Ferguson and has done other things on Robot Chicken and Family Guy and those places. He does a really great Morgan Freeman. So if I want to have Morgan Freeman, but I don't want to pay Morgan Freeman his rate, and I go to Josh to go do his Morgan Freeman impression, again, that sort of tilts the line between what am I really paying for? Am I using a distinctive voice without having to pay the actual person their stuff? Next, it has to be for commercial purposes. While I will tell you that is the legal entity, it has to be for commercial purposes. I would not just venture out and say, well, if this is for a nonprofit or this is educational, I still wouldn't do it just because it says commercial purposes. Again, this is the line between law and ethics. Ethics will tell you no. Law will probably say, you're better to err on the side of caution, but commercial purposes it's something to make money or to show brand awareness. And next is without permission. Again, if you have consent, therefore you will be fine. The last element that we look at is private facts. And private facts means these are facts about people that are private in nature. Again, publication, private information, highly offensive to a reasonable person, and not a legitimate of public concern. It's pretty simple, it's pretty straightforward.